Joining Alliance United Forces of Change ahead of the general elections 2021, we're joined by Mr. Godber Tumshabe, who is Associate Director, Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies. Welcome to NTV Tonight.
Thank you very much, Rita.
And we are also joined by Sarah Birete, who is the Associate Director at the Center for Constitutional Governance. Welcome to NTV Tonight, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Rita.
Now I'll start with you, Godber. What are your thoughts on this new alliance?
Yeah, so essentially, first of all, to think about it is to say what is the problem? What is the issue that this alliance or any other alliance is trying to confront? Ugandans, I think, need to understand that as a country, I think we are at a point where we need to describe ourselves as like we are in a condition of occupation. Because if you look at the way the government, the security forces deal with Ugandans, you really see that they are not dealing with Ugandans who have rights, who own the country. No, it's more or less like they are the owners, and the security forces have to enforce everything that the owners want. So essentially, it's a country that has been taken away from us. So for me, I'm happy that first of all that Bobi Wine and Kizza Besigye are talking of an alliance, working together, coming together to confront the situation that we have. But secondly, I think the most positive thing about this alliance is that this is an alliance of forces, not of political parties. Because we have lived a lie where people think that they are political parties. So in other words, there is a ruling party and an opposition political parties. And yet we know that in real terms, we don't have a ruling party. We have a group of people who captured the state, and therefore everybody who wants to oppose them is opposing the state. The very institutions of state that are supposed to be guaranteeing and protecting your rights are the same institutions that you have to be opposing or campaigning against. So I think the fact that we have Bobi Wine, who leads a movement of people power, and Kizza Besigye, who declared himself a people's president. So it's another movement coming together. I think that's what is positive about it, because at the end of the day, it's only the alliance of peoples. So the people power movement, the people's government, the media, the civil society, the religious institutions that have to come together to be able to resist the kind of oppression and injustices that we're seeing that have come to define the Uganda of today.
Okay, and what about you, Sarah? What do you have to say about this new alliance?
The new alliance is welcome, and I wish to note that it's important for the opposition to work together, but they should have principles guiding that alliance or coalition. I understand that the first objective the alliance announced was that they need to work together to fight COVID and work towards the elections. Yes, but they should first draw down principles, because we have had a series of coalitions in our politics in this country, starting with the pre-independence efforts and then Kabaka and UPC alliance that resulted into the crisis, the Uganda crisis, whose anniversary we are celebrating recently. But all these coalitions lacked clear principles that could hold them together. We had the inter-party forces led by Kawanga Semogere in 1996. But if you assess and see what has resulted in two efforts of people forming coalitions in this country, the results are not good. So whoever wants to come together to join forces, they first need to draw down principles and then follow through known principles for forming coalitions. For example, who leads a coalition, who stands for parliamentary seat on what post. All those things should be systematically determined by the forces, otherwise it will not hold.
Okay, now taking it back to just about 2015 when we had TDA, which you were a part of, God, but at some point, yes, there were a few things that were agreed upon, but when it came to this one candidate, now here you mentioned the fact that it's not about political parties, it's about movements, but these are two strong individuals that come with quite a backing. Will we see that at some point as we draw closer to 2021, even though the principles, as Sarah has mentioned, might be in place, the individual will be the issue?
You see, I think the the fundamental challenge for me is what people need to understand. That one, in most cases we plan to organize to participate in elections, and there are people who think that actually you can go through an election to be able to change our current situation. Because what is our current situation? Our current situation is where you have a complete state capture. The institutions of state have been captured by the cabal that calls itself NRM, because NRM is not accountable to anybody. It's not even accountable to Ugandans. So they have been captured. And so the institutions of state like the police, the military, the electoral commission, and many others. The institution of the RDC, you have the institution of the RDC, which is supposed to be a public service job, but this is a group that acts as a campaign team for President Museveni and NRM. So you need to understand that that is the nature of the problem. I want to argue, and I have been very consistent on this, that I don't believe that elections on their own, unless you have a massive revolt by the population, you cannot just go for election and say, oh, there is a party called NRM and FDC and DP and whatever, and say, we are going to retake our country from this capture. So the only way you can have elections be meaningful is if you are able to find a people coalition, a coalition of people, of movements, of individual citizens who say, this enough is enough. Citizens who know that the government is supposed to work for them, who know the police is supposed to work for them. Right now we have a police force. In the countries that are democratic, a police force is supposed to deal with public safety issues. Its job is to protect the citizens. Right now you have a regime protection police. Its main job is to protect the regime. And therefore you need to be able to understand all of that. And so for you to move forward with the elections, first of all, you have to understand that. In fact, I agree with Sarah that the main things you need to discuss are more about what is our objective, what are the obstacles, and how do we need to remove the obstacles. In fact, the moment you start discussing who will lead the coalition, you've completely lost it from the word go. You want to discuss a strategy of how you dismantle this cabal, and then it is the strategy that will help you choose who is the right person or the right team to lead the movement. But if you start by saying who will lead this thing, you know that you are discussing a completely different issue, and that is not the problem, because this country has had leaders, and many of these leaders have let us down. So the problem is not just the leaders. The problem is, what do we want to achieve? What is our strategy? And therefore, who is the leader to help us achieve that strategy?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap this up, just to bring you, Sarah, as well, back into the conversation, when we take a look at the general elections 2021, now all of this is aimed as we build up to that. But as we take a look at it, one thing is for certain right now is that many are looking at it as a scientific election that could possibly come around. What are your thoughts on it, Sarah?
Yeah, first of all, the COVID pandemic disrupted the EC roadmap. But we are also aware of the constitutional safeguards, especially when it comes to the tenure of the president. The tenure of the president cannot be extended beyond 12th May. So come 12th May, Uganda must have a new leader. So either we can do that through elections, or if elections are not possible, then through Article 77 of the Constitution, you can have an extension of Parliament, and then the Speaker of Parliament becomes the acting president. But President Museveni cannot extend his stay in power beyond 12th May 2021. So what are the options available to Uganda as a country? And I think this is the debate that EC as a lead actor in holding elections in Uganda has been avoiding for quite some time. The country has been discussing schools opening or not opening. We have been discussing public transport. We have been discussing all other sectors except the mandate of the people to elect their leaders in free and fair elections. So if we are unable, we all know that the roadmap for EC was halted in late March when the pandemic broke out. So we have not had electoral college activities for choosing MPs for special interest groups as well as other leaders. Electoral college activities should have ended with June, and we are midway June today, and we have 15 days remaining. So what are the available options? Option one is postpone elections of special interest groups and first get the presidential and parliamentary elections out of the way because of the rigidity of the constitution around presidential elections. If that is not possible, then we have to discuss how to extend elections in this country, and all stakeholders must be involved. But that includes President Museveni stepping down as per the constitutional guidelines. If we are to continue and have a scientific election, Electoral Commission has to prepare with guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health under the Public Safety Act. Do we disinfect the communities? Do we sanitize voters? Do we buy temperature gauges? Do we observe social distancing as people line up to vote? Can we extend hours of voting beyond the 4 p.m. that we have been having? Because if you have to observe social distancing and the number of people, limit the number of people required at a voting polling station, then you need to look at extending voting, maybe to cover 2 days, so that you enable everybody who is eligible to vote to turn up and vote. Or can we do a digital election? We know that the US, which has very high COVID cases, is proceeding with their electoral roadmap, and they will have elections in November. But the elections will be digital, purely digital. So can we digitalize our electoral system in this country? These are some of the options that are available to us.
Well, to you, Mr. Godber, what do you say of scientific elections within the country?
Well, my personal view is that a scientific election is a no-brainer in many different ways. First of all, I think Ugandans need to understand that for us as citizens, we want an election so that we can determine our leaders. So that's very important. And if the Electoral Commission understood it that way, actually they wouldn't even have acted the way they acted, because essentially with COVID, the Electoral Commission almost went absent. And for me, I have argued in some of my works that actually, if you see how the Electoral Commission behaved with this pandemic, you realize that this is not an independent Electoral Commission, because it still has to get instructions from somebody, from government, from the president. But otherwise, an independent Electoral Commission which understands that its responsibility is to protect the mandate of Ugandans would still continue planning all kinds of things, putting in place the infrastructure that enables you to conduct an election even in the case of a pandemic. That's basically what it should be doing. So it's not sufficient for an institution like an Electoral Commission to say, because there is a pandemic, we can't do anything. That tells you how inefficient you are as an institution. But secondly, in our current case, and I sympathize with Sarah's views about the scientific elections and whatever. In our current case, the person who needs election most is President Museveni, because in the event where he has lost support of the majority of Ugandans because of the challenges that Ugandans are facing, President Museveni needs an election to legitimize his stay in power. So my own projection is that President Museveni will insist on having an election, because the option that Sarah is proposing, which would be a smart possibility, that come 2021, President Museveni steps aside, the country negotiates an arrangement that allows elections to take place later. President Museveni would never think about that. So, in other words, what we are going to see is that President Museveni is going to organize this election, direct the Electoral Commission, which has done all the time, and make sure that there is an election, and produce the results that he wants, because he needs it to legitimize his stay in power.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That is having been joined by Mr. Godber Tumushabe, Associate Director at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, and Ms. Sarah Birete, Associate Director, Center for Constitutional Governance. Thank you so much for joining us on NTV tonight.